Hello and welcome to Rise Up with Rebecca Seawright on the Manhattan Neighborhood Network. I'm Assemblymember Rebecca Seawright, pleased to represent parts of the Upper East Side, Yorkville, and Roosevelt Island. Today we have a very special show in store. We're going to be focusing on sports and wellness, and the fastest growing sport today is pickleball. So we're pleased to be joined by two experts in the field, Scott Green, founder of Around the Post Pickleball, and Manny Boya of Westchester Pickleball. So I will lead off today with Scott Green. As early as 2017, after playing pickleball for only 1 year, Scott Green saw the potential in pickleball and has been teaching a clinic and hosting tournaments and competing in tournaments around the country. And so we're pleased to hear from Scott, as well as Manny Boya, who has been competing and teaching pickleball all around the globe. And so we thank both of you for joining us today. Scott, we'll let you lead off. Tell us a little bit about pickleball and what it is and why it's the fastest growing sport. I spoke to Mayor Adams yesterday, who loves pickleball and plays in Brooklyn. I invited him to come to Yorkville, to Carl Schurz Park, and play pickleball with us. And just so pleased to announce that New York City is looking at dedicated space and rededicating space, also being respectful of parents with strollers, basketball, handball, and tennis players. But pickleball is a fast-growing sport. And so tell us all about pickleball, Scott.
Well, thank you for having me, Rebecca. It's quite a privilege. Thank you. I think pickleball is at a popular point right now because it's a game that has a very slow learning curve. It's easy to learn. It's easy to play. It was, for the better term or not term, it was a geriatric Sunbelt sport for years. And I think just before the pandemic, it started to reach a new audience. That's when I got into it in 2015 or 16. I just fell in love with the game, and being a former tennis pro, I took to it quickly. I think the thing that is most inviting about pickleball, it is social. It is very relaxed. There's not a lot of running around, but it is still a great workout. But I think its popularity now and why it has become the craze that it is because we were cooped up for 2 or 3 years with the pandemic. I think people who started to play it missed it. I think they heard about it. New people heard about it. And I just think that after being penned up for a couple of years, it has really blossomed because we can get out, we can do things. It's an inexpensive sport to play. Again, it's very social, and you're going to find results quite quickly by playing pickleball continuously. There are different ways to play the game, but you can play the game pretty much straight away if you just stick with it and play. I have instituted a program right around the corner from my house where they had unwanted and unused badminton courts, which are the same dimensions as pickleball without the lines lining up, but they painted the lines for us, and I donated 8 nets. And I'm very happy to say that we've been holding clinics every weekend, and our last scheduled one is this weekend. And but players are using the nets and playing every day. It really, I've never seen anything in sports like this, and I'm sure Manny would say the same thing, but it's just an enjoyable game to play. You can't take it very serious unless you're playing in tournaments, and you just feel good after playing it. It's going to be here. I mean, this craze may end soon. I don't think it will, but the players are here now, and the sport definitely has stamped its place in American sports for sure.
Thank you, Scott. And I know we're reading about famous athletes like LeBron James recently purchasing a team and getting involved in the sport. And I'm hearing from my constituents all over Yorkville and Roosevelt Island that they're wanting dedicated pickleball courts. And Roosevelt Island has a wonderful Halloween festival coming up the end of the month. And I just heard yesterday from pickleballers on Roosevelt Island that want a dedicated court for their sport, and so deserving. Manny, let me ask you, I know you're a former fireman and veteran and an avid pickleball teacher, coach, pro. Tell us about your passion for the sport.
Where do I begin? I'm currently a New York City firefighter. So I've actually been on for 17 years, which I'm super excited about. My passion started in a small gym in Yorktown in Westchester. I was working out in a gym and I hear the sound of pickleball paddles and balls in a basketball gym. And me being curious, I go in and just ask, what is this? They immediately welcome me in, as pickleball players always do. They're so friendly and kind. And come to find out, the gentleman that was running this program of, about 20 elderly people said, hey, I was a former New York City firefighter. And he ended up showing me the game. And I became in love with it instantly. I felt something. I felt something in me that was it was unexplainable, right? Just sharing with people that thought they were not able to play another sport ever again. And yet they just added 20 years to their life because of pickleball. And I started researching it. And I'm like, why isn't this sport here? Why aren't we showing this sport to many more places? As I started playing and I started teaching, I realized that this game is more than a sport. It changes everybody's lives, including mine. One of my most inspiring stories is playing with somebody who had a stroke in the right side of his body, and he felt that he could never play anything again. And all of a sudden, this sport like pickleball was introduced to him, and he's playing on a court with people who are able while he is disabled, and he's having a good time. And it touched my heart. Playing with a grandmother who was 85 years old, who felt, I wanted to bring my family together, and asked me for a lesson for her granddaughter and her daughter. I decided to find out, why is the sport not being as respected as it was? Why is it that, we're always second to tennis? Why is it that we're lines on a basketball court? Why is it that it's in a sports closet? And when people look at the hula hoop or the dodgeball, they say, oh, let's play pickleball. So I started carrying nets in my backpack. I'm also a USAPA ambassador, which I have been for 3 years, even before the pandemic. And my passion for the game, I had so much passion for the game that I would carry with 6 nets and tape, right? Because we would have to tape everything up. They didn't have, they don't have many dedicated pickleball courts everywhere. And I would go from place to place throughout the county, Westchester County and New York. I would get the firefighters and policemen involved. And finally, the town started realizing that it's time for dedicated courts. The community started growing. It's not just a sport that you play or you teach and then you forget about your students. It's a sport that it's a community. It starts from 2, then goes to 4, then goes to 20, and up to 30. In Yorktown Heights alone, we have over 500 pickleball players. In Westchester County, we're probably at about 5,000 and growing, which is super exciting. And I've dedicated my life right after, from now on, just to spread the word, spread what pickleball does to the community, to the kids. And now that LeBron James and Kevin Durant and all these guys are now part of pickleball, that makes it cooler for the kids, right? It's not just a sport that is played by 80-year-olds, but it's a sport like Scott said before. It's very easy to learn. You can progress rather quickly, but it's very hard to master. And I think that's what makes this game so special.
Thank you, Manny. And let me just mention that in Albany, where I spend a lot of time at the Capitol, November 20th, Scott will be having a pickleball clinic. And Martin Luther King weekend, I believe, will be the first Around the Post pickleball tournament in Albany, which we'll learn more from about Scott. But I want to segue into a New York Times article that came out several months ago about the injuries with pickleball and what precautions people can take, because it does come across as an easy sport, easier than tennis. But then I also hear that most of the really good shots occur right at that kitchen line. I recently watched the #1 player, Ben Johns, and his brother play in a national tournament on TV, and a pro mother and daughter, Lee Waters, and her 15-year-old daughter, Anna Lee Waters, who are top pro champions. What precautions, Scott, do you think people should be taking to avoid accidents, especially with our older community and population playing pickleball?
Well, Rebecca, I think that with any sport, you've got to come onto the court, you've got to stretch, you've got to loosen up, you've got to do things. You also have to know what your limits are. And I think sometimes injuries like tripping and falling can occur from someone older who is going for a shot that he may not be able to get. So it's really picking and choosing how far you want to go and how much you want to give on the court. But just basic stretching and loosening up every sport, no matter what it is. I went through golf, and I mean, there's 65,000 golf cart injuries every decade. So you can get hurt playing any sport. And I thought that was pickleball got a little bit of a bad rap there, because any sport you play, you can get hurt. But if you're prepared, bring water when it's a hot day, stay hydrated, sit down, take a break, just do the right things like you would for any other sport. And before I forget, I just have to tell you, it's an interesting that we mentioned LeBron James and Kevin Durant. Their agents who brokered those two deals were clients of ours, and they became tremendous players, Richie Kleiman and Jason Stein. And I'm so proud that they've taken the sport and run with it. So I think preparation before a match or before playing is really the basic thing, and knowing your limits. Know your limits. That's really, like I said, any sport you can get hurt at, but just being prepared when you go on the court and know what you can do and not do, I think, is paramount.
Right. I definitely agree with Scott. One of the biggest things that I always teach my students or tell my students is sneakers and what you wear on your feet is very important.
Without a doubt.
You wear, we always tell them running sneakers are meant for running, and then tennis sneakers are meant for lateral movement. So I think the education that they get is important, starting from the teacher. So I tend to tell them, stretching exercises, wear the right sneakers, make sure that you are hydrating, just like Scott said. We are currently working in our communities. We're working with doctors and physical therapists in ways that we can come up with programs that they can educate the pickleball players as well, because now they're starting, some pickleball players haven't played sports in years, and now they're playing the sport. And some of you pickleball players know what are the famous last words for pickleball, right? One more game. And when you always push your body that one more game and you're not prepared, that's usually when the injuries happen. But again, education, and that's what we're here for.
And pickleball is a sport that all age range can play. I know Scott recently entered into the public school to teach, I believe it was fourth graders, the game. And it's really a social sport as well. Here on the Upper East Side, there is a link for Carl Schur players, and I know there is for Central Park and Brooklyn and Queens. And soon I'm sure something will pop up on Roosevelt Island among the players there that meet. And there's something also in Manhattan, I believe, called Pickleball and Pasta and Happy Hour in Yorkville after playing pickleball. So what do you see the benefits of pickleball in terms of wellness and fitness for all age ranges, and what equipment is needed to play the game of pickleball? Can you describe the wiffle ball? And it's actually not a racket, it's a paddle. So let's go over some basics. What equipment is needed?
Sure. So first we play with a perforated ball, which is a plastic, it's almost like a wiffle ball. And like you said, a paddle and a net. That's all you need. Originally, when it was created, the net itself, it was meant to put from one end of the sidewalk to the other, so you could play in the street. And really, you could just line it out with chalk, or you could line it out with tape. And besides that, just some sneakers, 4 players, and to have a good time.
And sneakers should be flat on the bottom, like tennis sneakers, not.
So tennis sneakers, if you notice tennis sneakers, they're very hard on the bottom, right? They don't, it allows for support to your arches. This way, when you are doing your lateral movements, you are not rolling, you're not rolling your foot. A lot of podiatrists say that pickleball players are the best thing that have happened to them in a long time, right? Because of because of injuries. And this is why they're educating their clients more on proper footwear.
We've actually had people show up on the court in sandals and would not let them play. A couple of people came to our free clinic back in June, and the footwear, and we look at their footwear. And my partner, Bob Lassard, is a stickler for this. And if you haven't got flat shoes that are made for tennis, we sort of really tell you, you've got to get the proper footwear, because tripping does happen, and it's a lateral movement game. There's not a lot of back and forth. There's not a lot of running. I think that's the ultimate popularity. What's made the sport so popular. It's not tennis. You're not running around. After you scoot up to the non-volley line, it's all lateral movement, and you've got to have the proper footwear with proper support. So that is paramount. I also will say that even though I wear sunglasses most of the time because I play outside, I am very surprised that eyewear, protective eyewear, has not become a little bit more involved or, stressed upon, because really you're not going to get hurt if you get hit with a pickleball, no matter how hard somebody hits you. But if you catch one in the eye, it can do some damage. And I'm surprised that more people are not wearing protective clear or sunglasses every time they play. I'd like to see maybe the USAPA do something as far as getting the word out as far as that's concerned, or any other organization. But eyewear protection is a key also for me.
And I understand that I've heard that detached retinas is the second most common pickleball injury, next to falling and shoes and ankles and feet, that the detached retina is a serious thing. And we want to encourage all of our players and viewers to wear eye protective gear. And in terms of paddles, I know I recently saw a group of U.S. military guys out playing with wooden paddles. What's the difference between the wooden paddle and the plastic paddle? Is there one that's better than the other?
First of all, a paddle is your paddle is subjective. There are so many manufacturers now of paddles. I mean, you talk about an industry that's exploded. 5 or 6 years ago, it was Selkirk and Franklin and maybe one or two others. And now everybody and their mother is making a paddle. So the paddles that you use today are usually a honeycomb pattern underneath the skin. It's a graphite paddle. It's lighter. I have played with people in the last year or two who still use a wooden paddle. It's just the way they like, the way it feels. It's certainly a lot heavier. I came from a tournament in Middletown, Ohio this summer that was the 18th annual tournament, and they had paddles from their first years that some of them were homemade paddles cut out of plywood with tape around, and they cut out a paddle, the shape of a paddle, and that's what they use. So the dynamic of paddles and the evolution of it has certainly changed. So it's very subjective how, I've got 3 paddles in I'm sure Manny does too. I have 3 paddles in my bag, and then every day I pick one up, and if I'm not making a couple of shots, I'm going to the other one, and which usually happens quite often. But it's the difference between a paddle used today and something that pioneers use. It's basically the weight, but it's also become big time business. You want to buy a good paddle today, you're paying $175 to $200 for a paddle. We offer beginners paddles to our first timers for $40. We have a great beginner paddle. That's probably the only expense. So that's the great thing about the sport, is most places are going to have the balls. Most places are going to have the nets. You need to buy a paddle and a really good pair of sneakers, of tennis shoes. And then of course you can get fancy, and then it's, how much fashion you want to get in matching shirts and shorts or whatever. But the paddle is evolving, and it's not going to stop evolving.
And just to touch on what Scott said, it could also be very overwhelming for a beginner when you ask them to choose a paddle and they don't know what to choose from. So, I always say, just choose a paddle, like Scott said, that's for basics. Use this paddle for now and have fun. Don't get into all the details. And then later on, as you progress, you start using other paddles. What a lot of companies are doing, which is great, especially if you have some local stores, they let you demo their paddles and you can kind of try it before you buy it, which is very important. We actually have the pleasure in Yorktown of having probably the second, if not the first largest paddle distributor in the country, which is a Paddle Pro located in Yorktown. And it's nice because their warehouse is located there in Yorktown. So you can actually go in and you can actually pick a paddle, sneakers, and anything you're ordering online, you can actually feel it before you go. But for beginners, it's just like Scott said, choose 2 or 3 paddles, let them choose from that, have fun, and the rest they'll figure out later.
So how did pickleball get its name? Tell us a little bit about the history of pickleball.
I just know the legendary or the lore that it was about, it started on Bainbridge Island in Washington State, and it was used as a way for a father to keep his kids basically corralled in the yard. So what I knew was they had a dog named Pickles who would run around and chase the balls and chew on the balls. That's how I think it got the name. I'm not gonna lie, I can't stand the name. It's pickleball. I mean, it sounds like whatever. So maybe Manny knows a little bit more about it.
It's funny you say that, right? So that's why the game isn't taken serious. Every time when I first try to introduce it to New York City firefighters, they're like, why would we play a name with pickles in it? And it has nothing to do with pickles. And, so it was always funny. So I started researching it because that's what I would tell everybody. So the commercial, so it started in 1965 by Pritchard in Seattle, in Bainbridge Island, right? The small little island. And like Scott said, there was a couple of congressmen who had their families out in the backyard, and they said, you know what, we need to create a game to get these kids up off their feet. So they had a badminton net, they had some ping pong paddles, and they had some wiffle balls. And as the game progressed, they started creating rules and started going along. And 3 hours later, the kids are like, excuse me, can we play? And meanwhile, they're like, be quiet, sit down while we finish the game. And as it progressed, they started creating paddles out of plywood, like Scott mentioned, right? So it became a little bit bigger. They lowered the net because one of the congressmen was a lot taller than most of them, so he was getting most of the balls, and they put the non-volley zone in effect so that it'd be more fair. According to what I was reading, Pritchard mentioned to his wife, he said, hey, listen, I created the sport. It's 3 different sports in one. I can't think of a name. And his wife said, you know what? It kind of reminds me of the pickle boats, right? The pickle boats in Bainbridge Island were a bunch of rowing competition and boat competitions all in one. And he said, maybe we can call it pickleball. So he ended up calling it pickleball. And 3 years later, as it became popular, they said, you know what? It doesn't sound as cool. It's not as family friendly. Let's just say that the dog's name was Pickle, and every time somebody would hit the ball, Pickle would grab the ball and he'd run away.
So that's great. What a great story and great history of the sport of pickleball. And our office was so pleased to partner with Scott Green on hosting a senior wellness fair in Carl Schurz Park about a month ago. It was very well attended. Over 200 people came out for our fair and learned the game of pickleball. And this morning I was out at 7 a.m. on the Upper East Side to donate 50 orange pickleballs to Carl Schurz Park for the avid pickleball players there. Scott, before we leave, just tell us a little bit about this upcoming tournament in the winter. And let me just ask both of you, what are the pickleball players doing now that the season is changing and cold weather is setting in? Are there indoor facilities that people can play in? I know, like I said, Mayor Adams is very dedicated to solving this pickleball problem and challenge of people that are really, really wanting to play. They have pickleball fever. The sport is exploding. But now that winter is coming along, what are avid players doing to continue to play through the winter months?
Well, Rebecca, the good news is I'll just talk about Long Island in particular. I have been contacted by 2 or 3 new pickleball places that are opening on Long Island. So you're going to see more indoor places coming. I also think you're going to see more schools, perhaps some colleges, start to put aside a few hours a day or on the weekends. I'm hoping that Hampton Bays High School is going to do that just for one morning, either Saturday or Sunday at either one of their gyms, so we can continue our clinics. I mean, the revenue is there. People are going to want to play. So you're going to see more indoor places starting to come about throughout the region.
Oh yeah, of course. Just like Scott said, a lot of the gyms are still using the indoor lines. A lot of tennis facilities are actually understanding the monetary value of pickleball. So now what they're doing is they're adding their own dedicated lines on tennis courts. You have a lot of condominiums and a lot of places that are also taking their gyms and their communities and putting it in there as well. So like Scott said, you're going to see it very soon. I mean, the explosion in the area, the explosion that's about to happen, we thought we saw it before, but this is it's really going to be amazing. And as pickleball players, it's nice to see.
It's also great to see, Manny and Rebecca, that I think one of the things that we haven't harped on a little bit is why the growth of it is so big. It's getting younger. Okay, we are teaching children how to play pickleball. I mean, look at who the #1 players in the world are. I mean, they're young men and young women. And if the sport continues to get younger, it's never going to go away. It's always going to be here. And I think a lot of, municipalities, a lot of government agency are realizing that listen, this sport is here. It's not the geriatric Sunbelt sport anymore. So,
and it's a great family sport as well.
It is a fabulous.
My son's competing in tournaments and impressed that I can volley back and forth with him. So it's just such a great sport and for all ages. But we are out of time, and I want to thank both of you for coming on today and sharing your expertise about the sport with our viewers. One final question: what's the greatest tip that you can give a beginner?
I would say the greatest tip I would give beginners. So when a beginner comes on, I say, what is your sports background? And they all go, I play tennis. The greatest thing I think we can tell them is shorten your stroke. It's not tennis, but the most important thing is have fun. If you don't have fun doing this, and it'd be pretty hard pressed not to have fun doing it, don't play it. So shorten your stroke and have fun.
Of
and
course.
Manny, what's the greatest tip for an advanced player like yourself?
The greatest tip for an advanced player is don't forget where you came from. Understand that just because you're advanced, give back to the beginners. All right. What I tend to notice with advanced players is sometimes even with me, it's like, oh no, I don't want to play with this group. I'd rather play with this group, but it's so rewarding to see them. And even with the kids, right? They see somebody who's athletic and more advanced, and now they look at it and wow, that's how the sport is supposed to be played. But remember, this sport, you want to give back. And that's the beautiful thing about the sport. And I will always give back. And that's where my passion lies.
Wonderful. Thank you both. And my tip for today is going to be stay out of the kitchen, which is a pickleball marked line on the court. Real quickly, who wants to explain what the kitchen is in pickleball?
The area between the net is 7 feet from the net is the non-volley zone or the kitchen, and you are not allowed to hit a ball on a fly or a volley while touching or going into that area. Like Manny said, that was I think the greatest thing about the sport was when it was first invented that one of the congressmen was probably tall enough, so there's no going up the net and spiking the ball. And that is the great equalizer in pickleball. It really is. It puts everybody on a level playing field, which is a great thing about the sport.
Terrific. So my recommendation is just get out there and play as much as you can. It's a great sport. And we appreciate both Scott Green and Manny Boya coming on the show today. I'm Rebecca Seawright, Assembly Member representing parts of the Upper East Side, Yorkville, and Roosevelt Island. Thank you for tuning in. Please feel free to call our office at 212-288-4607 if you're looking for a place to play pickleball in Manhattan or Roosevelt Island. Give us a call. And if you need your vaccine, we do have some open slots for the winter vaccine as well as the booster shot. So give us a call and register for the vaccine, and have a wonderful fall. Thank you again.